We are 4 games into the NHL regular season, and the St. Louis Blues are 2-2-0. They've had some trouble finding consistency here in the early part of the regular season, and one big reason for their struggles has been that their best players haven't really performed and lived up to the task. So if the Blues really want to improve this season, get to that 100-point threshold they've been talking about, they're really going to need players like Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Colton Parayko, and some others to step up and lead the team. Why have they been struggling? What's behind it? What do we need to see out of these players moving forward? Will any veterans step up? We're going to talk about all that and more today on Note News. Welcome into another episode of Note News. It's John and Alec back with you as always. We're a St. Louis Blues podcast, and we go live twice a week talking all things Blues. And we got some regular season games to react to. So we've made it out of the off season, which is exciting. But the Blues' start to the season has been less exciting than we had hoped. So we're going to talk about all that today. If you're new to Note News, we'd appreciate if you would subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or follow, rate, and review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. And then follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. Post a lot of other great stuff over there. It's got some new graphics for the new season. Go check all that out. Alec, last we talked was after 2 games. The Blues were 1-1-0, and we talked at that episode about how the Blues needed to go at least 2-1-0 this week. They are 1-1 for the week, so hoping they can get a win this weekend against Dallas. But one really good-looking game against Vancouver and one really bad-looking game against Chicago last night. Why don't we start with just go in chronological order here. Start with Vancouver. Obviously, the Blues won 5-2 in that one and had a great game out of Jimmy Snuggerud, the best game of his career so far. But I'll pass it off to you. What did you see out of the Blues that you liked in that game? What do you think they were doing well that they maybe weren't doing so well in their first couple of games?
The Vancouver game was a really dominating performance by the Blues. I think they did a really good job as a team playing together. And even though there were some miscues, like they were still missing some passes over the middle of the ice or in the neutral zone, they still found ways to really create offensive chances and quickly turn around on the Vancouver Canucks. So I think they did a really good job playing together as a team. I think their offensive pressure was really good. Their forechecking in the offensive zone was really heavy, really physical, and was really effective. And defensively, they did enough to disrupt passing lanes. I would still say there was some meat left on the bone defensively, but at the same time, I think they could have scored 2 more goals than they ended up. So I think that the Vancouver game was a really great showing of what this team can be playing against a competitive Vancouver Canucks team. You know, I think a lot of people have them written off for the playoffs, but that isn't necessarily the case. Like they are still in a very similar situation, fighting for their lives and their playoff chances. And the Blues kind of took it to them. So I think that they showed everything that they needed to show in a must-win game, and not only that, but they came out and proved that they were just better all around in all phases, offensively, defensively, play in transition, play on the boards. They won pretty much everything except I think the face-off battles, which has been a theme on the season now. Is the face-offs have not been good enough, but that's another talking point for another time. Yeah, they really came together and impressed me in the game against Vancouver.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Obviously, I mean, this was something we talked about last episode. Was I think we picked out Jimmy Snuggerud by name and said, like, this kid needs to get it going. And not that he was looking bad at that point, but just that he was kind of not really noticeable. And we want this to be we want Snuggerud to become a leader for this team. So that was something that we had talked about last time, and boy did he he come out with a great game against Vancouver, scoring 2 goals. Really excited to see that for him. I think the Blues did a really good job of getting to the net front. That was something that we talked about them having a bit of a harder time with in the first couple games. So it was good to see them score a few up front. I think Pius Suter looked good as well in his return to Vancouver. Um, he uh, got the assist, I believe, on the second. Was that the first or second Snuggerud goal where he just kind of slid it over to him? I can't remember which one it was, but um, they were kind of there in the slot, and Suter had a guy on him and was able to get it over to Snuggerud for the goal. So great play there. I thought he played a great all around game. I've also been impressed with Matthew Joseph here in the early season. I wanted to call him out by name in a good way because I think he's having a really good season. I think his some of his on ice metrics look really good. I think that third line that we have seen develop of Suter, Joseph, and Snuggerud is kind of fun. Obviously Jake Neighbors is having a great start to the season and has elevated to the top line at times, and especially the past couple of games has been seeing those top line minutes. And Snuggerud had sort of slid back to the third line, but I thought that line had looked pretty effective of Joseph, Suter, Snuggerud. So really glad to see that
Yeah.
out of the Blues.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much Snuggerud got demoted, more so that his play
Sure.
elevated the level of guys like Joseph, and it was a fun combo. It did work out really well. So yeah, I think you make a good point there.
Yeah, maybe not demoted, but maybe just Neighbors earned that spot. I think just coming out playing with his hair on fire to start the season. But yeah, for sure. So that was a great game, and as you said, it felt like they could have kept going. Good to see Jordan Bennington have a bit of a better game. So, glad to see that bounce back after a rough season opener for him. And then things got much worse last night against Chicago at home. Got shelled 8-3. It looked pretty rough in a lot of different ways. And I don't want to give him too much flack because I think Joel Hofer is the reason the Blues won Game 2 against Calgary. He really kept them in that game and had a fantastic game. So we know what he is. We've seen the kind of goalie he can be. I think he just had a really rough night. I think giving up that first goal the way he did, he is a goalie who's pretty confident in his puck handling ability. So to have that be what bites you and sort of gets the opponent on the board pretty quickly, it's got to rattle you, and I think it did, and then it rattled him enough to let in maybe the next couple, and then from there on out it was just kind of he just couldn't come back. But you were at the game, Alec. What did you like? What happened in this one? Because I think we were feeling pretty optimistic. At least I was after that victory in Vancouver, won two in a row, playing against a worse opponent now. So I was excited to see them maybe get a 3-game win streak going. What happened in this one that led to the Blues losing so poorly?
It was a really hard game to watch, especially to be at. It was a frustrating game in all phases. It felt like they regressed across the board. I guess offensively, they still put up 3 goals and could have had one or two more. So offensively, I think they played fine enough, but defensively, in this game, and I think this has been a little bit of a trend that's starting to worry me now, is that the defensive structure that this team was riding so heavily and to such great success last season was just not present at all, was not there in the slightest. And what I mean by defensive structure is the forwards chipping in and helping in the defensive zone and playing playing intelligently for the puck. Disrupting passing lanes, blocking shots is a big one that they've gotten away from so far this year, and really like not allowing other teams to get set up on the cycle. And Chicago was passing the puck with ease the whole night. The defensive
Yeah.
structure has instead looked uncoordinated and has looked frantic and has looked completely just lost, really, especially from the forwards. And the defense as a whole has been really, really, really poor. And I think Chicago took advantage of it. They've got some guys who can score, and then they had some guys left one on one with the goalie, and there's not much you can ask a goaltender to do there. On top of that, I do think Hofer had just had a terrible game. I mean, he did allow, I think 7 goals was the final total. And some of those, he would want back. I don't think you can fault all of them on Hofer, but
Yeah.
it was it was a total collapse of everything that the Blues had been doing well up to that point in
Mhm.
Vancouver as well as last season. It's like the Jim Montgomery effect, was just not there at all. They didn't look prepared. They didn't look like they knew how to play hockey confidently. It looked like they were just waiting to spring their next offensive rush chance and forgot that you had to play 200 feet the whole way and actually defend in your own zone. So, yeah, it was a rough loss. I'm not going to mince words, because they got embarrassed on home ice. They now have a -10 goal differential on home ice in 2 games. That's atrocious.
I would
So it
argue that
has to
that's
be
pretty
better.
bad.
Yeah, analysts say that's no good. Um,
Analysts say 8-3 loss bad.
yeah, after a 5-0 shutout. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Um,
some tough home performances for sure.
mhm.
This one felt a lot like kind of like you were saying, death by a thousand cuts. Just a lot of things that went wrong. Sometimes, like you said, it was Hofer's fault. Sometimes it was lack of defensive structure that has served him so well in the past. That's something I really want to tease out once we get into our main segment for this episode. Is that what's going on with the defense? I think that's a big part of the discussion today. But just sort of talking about this game specifically, as I said, it felt like just a lot went wrong. One of the criticisms we had of the first couple of games for the Blues is they were just giving up too many, high danger opportunities and high danger goals. They still gave up too many of those in this one. I mean, they gave up like 5 goals in high danger areas, but the goals were also coming from further out. So there were some other issues here. Um, it just felt like nothing was going their way. And as you said, Chicago is a team that can score. They've got a lot of young talent that is pretty offensively capable. Games against Chicago this season in particular, I think, are gonna need to be kind of barn burner type games where you're gonna win like a 5-4 game or something like that because they can score. I think the Blues can definitely play better defense against Chicago than they did last night, but you're going to have a hard time keeping them off the score sheet entirely. They're pretty offensively, dynamic, but defense is not their strong suit, so you should be able to get some of your own going the other way. The Blues really just couldn't get anything going last night. So you talked about defense. What did you see offensively that was part of the struggle here? And I think part of the part of this discussion is our main topic for the day is just that the veterans are have not stepped up so far. But did you see anything offensively that should be fixed for the Blues moving forward, or there should be a target to be fixed for the Blues moving forward?
I mean, I think offensively they are playing actually not terribly. I think there's some good going on that's still worth being excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that yeah, I guess I feel that I think that they are building off their rush chances pretty well. I think they're creating rush chances in mass, which has
Mm-hmm.
been effective and very helpful to their overall strategy. And I think they're doing an okay job at establishing the zone. I think they could do a little bit better, and that's probably the area where I'd want to see them, like you said, improve a little bit and show a little bit more would be establishing the zone. Um, but otherwise, I think that they've done a good job at creating offense when there isn't a lot there and being a threatening team. Like even when we were down, I don't even remember what the score differential was, but we were down like 3 goals or something. It still felt like the Blues were in the game, and they still played like it felt like they were in the game. Um, so Yeah, I think that offensively, there's actually a lot to be hopeful for. Guys like Holloway and Snuggerud are absolutely flying around the ice right now. Holloway especially just looks
Hmm.
amazing. Um, and I think what we need offensively to get going is the topic of this episode is the veterans. Is the guys who are supposed to lead this roster have to be leading this roster. Robert Thomas is not doing enough right now. Jordan Kyrou is not doing enough right now. Pavel Buchnevich is playing decent but needs to play better for if this team wants to get where we think they can go, and get to that 100-point threshold.
Hmm.
Um, and Braden Shen, I'll throw in that list too. Like they all seem, I'm not sure what exactly I'm searching for here, but they aren't doing enough to drive this offense forward. The offense is really being driven
Yeah.
by the speed and youth and athleticism of guys like Holloway and Snuggerud and Jake Neighbors.
Hmm.
They're playing with a lot of fight versus the Thomas, Kyrou, Buchnevich, Shen of it all are playing a lot more passively, and um, it's really showing. It's really not showing up on the stat sheet. I mean, Thomas has had some nice passes. Kyrou's had some shots on goal. Buchnevich has had some looks. They've all had moments, but that consistency isn't there. And consistency is why you have veteran players around, is to
Hmm.
stabilize things in your roster. And especially for a guy like Robert Thomas, this Blues team is only going to go as far as Robert Thomas can take it. And right
Hmm.
now, Thomas is not doing enough. So
Yeah.
the veterans have to step it up, and that's the biggest thing on offense that we're missing right now is that savvy, experienced presence on the roster.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to that point in the game last night, just looking at individual event maps on Natural Stat Trick is kind of it's pretty illuminating here. Look at Robert Thomas. He's got one shot on goal, one shot that went wide, and one shot that was blocked. So really one shot on goal and like three shot attempts. You look at Jordan Kyrou, it's worse. One shot attempt on goal, one that just went wide. So two shot attempts. Who else? Who else do you want to look at? Let's look at let's see, Braden Shen maybe if I can find him. Braden Shen, he had one shot that went wide. So like these players aren't attempting enough. You look at Colton Parayko though. Colton Parayko I think had a decent looking game. He had so many shot attempts. I think he had like five shots on goal last night. I think Parayko belongs in our conversation for today, but I think last night he did take some chances, and that's sort of his style in this system. But yeah, like you said, the Blues are the kind of team where they don't necessarily have a superstar that they can rely on to produce all the time for them. I mean, like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou have been pretty consistent for a few years now. We're not seeing that right now, but they don't provide the level of scoring that can really carry a team the way that Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon can, and it's a tough comparison to live up to. But what I'm saying is, the Blues are the kind of team that, and this is something we've discussed, they get a lot of production all over the lineup, all up and down, and so a big part of that does need to be the veterans. I think they've got a solid mix of veteran and youth. A little bit more youth this year than last year, and maybe that's part of it. But like you said, a lot of the young guys have been stepping up. Jake Neighbors looks fantastic to start this season. Jimmy Snuggerud, after a uneventful couple games, came alive in Vancouver. I mean, who else? Dylan Holloway, like you pointed out. I mean, Logan Mayu is another thing, and I don't think we're really going to get into the Mayu discussion today. That's maybe a topic for another day. But most of the young guys, I think, have looked pretty solid. It's the veterans that look very uninspiring and just kind of flat in a lot of ways. So why don't we go ahead and move into that segment of sort of our main topic of the day is just that what's going on here and how can this be fixed? The Blues really need, as I said at the top, they need their veterans to lead this team. They have that goal of improving to 100 points this season, of making the playoffs again, hopefully nabbing, one of those divisional spots rather than being in the wild card hunt uh, through to the end of the season. And so to do that, they're really going to need their best players to carry this team. And Robert Thomas tops the list. He's not looking great. I think he's got a goal and an assist through 4 games, 2 points. Sure, like that's okay. Um, but it's beyond that. It's his pace of play and how the team looks around him. It's not what we're used to. It's not what he's used to, and so that's been disappointing to start the season. And I think similar criticisms can be made of Jordan Kyrou and Braden Shen at times, and that top pair, while it looked good last night, I would say maybe hasn't at other times. And the sample size is still small, and we don't want to overreact to all this stuff for sure. But the fact that it would be one thing if a couple of these guys, were having a rough start to the season, but the rest looked okay. It just feels a little bit more concerning. And again, we'll try not to overreact here, but it feels a little bit more concerning that it's a lot of these vets that look like they're struggling here. So just offensively speaking, Robert Thomas has a goal and an assist, as I said. Pavel Buchnevich, he's looked a little bit better, 3 assists. Jordan Kyrou and Colton Parayko each have 2 assists. Braden Shen has a goal and an assist, and Cam Fowler has 1 assist. That's just offensive production, and it's not, it doesn't measure everything. But I would argue that most of these guys haven't looked as good as we would have expected them to look out of the gate. So, um, do you have any general thoughts on their struggles? We can sort of start to break down why we think this is happening, but any thoughts on, as we move into this section of the conversation, the impact that their struggles have on this team?
Well, and not just offensively are they struggling, but defensively, outside of probably
Sure.
Kyrou, I'd say, they're
Yeah, that's a
playing
big part.
pretty poor as well. I think Thomas is a guy who's really struggling defensively, and it's just not looked. It looks like he doesn't know what he's doing out there. Um, I don't know what it is that's going on with these players that previously were good defenders and just suddenly forget how to play defense. And that is okay. That's probably me overreacting a little bit to the small sample size. I think they will turn it around and figure it out because they have shown that in the past. But so far, the defense has been really poor, as well as the offense being um, slumping to boot. So it's the totality of struggling that makes this feel so much worse, and that makes it so much harder to not see this as a pattern and versus just a one-off like they'll figure it out. And for the record, I should say I still do have hope that they will figure it out. I still have reason
Sure.
to believe. I guess I'll start there. It's the start of the season. There's still a lot of time to go, and they're the Blues have always been a second half team. It takes them a while to gel. I mean, look at what happened last season and in seasons previous. But usually the start of the season isn't this volatile, and that's why I think there's a little bit more reason to be concerned uh, with what we're seeing so far. So, um, like you said, it is still a small sample size, but yeah, they have to be better. They have to step it up, and it seems like they they just can't find a rhythm on offense. The veterans haven't found any kind of semblance of normalcy on offense. It seems like the only guys who can are the ones with speed, are the ones with youth, and who can skate around other opposing skaters. The veterans on the team who are struggling seem to be trying to do all this passing, and all the passing right now is just off kilter. It's just
Hmm.
not on right now, especially in the neutral zone. They've dropped so many passes and just given easy giveaways to the other team. So I think that there's a fundamental lack of of connection going on right now on this team, and it's making it so hard to adapt because if you can't even start a play because you can't pick up a pass, then you have no chance of settling into a rhythm and generating consistent pressure offensively. And that's
Mhm.
what these forwards rely on. Buchnevich is better um, as a dangerous winger in the offensive zone. Robert Thomas is, I mean, Thomas can be effective anywhere, but he hasn't been so far.
Mhm.
Jordan Kyrou is a guy with speed who's better when he's entering the zone and blowing past defenders. And right now they're just dumping the puck in deep and chasing after it with like half energy to get there. So yeah, I think there's something going on. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a practice thing because when I think passing is the issue, I think practice is what I go to on that, and it seems like that's something that they really need to drill at top speeds. Maybe they haven't been doing so because they were worried about injuries, but at this point, we're starting to lose games, and we're starting to lose games bad. So it's
Yeah.
time to go. It's time for Jim Montgomery to light a fire under what of this team, and it's time to get a move on here because this is it looks really ugly and yeah, there's a lot to say, but I do think that not only have they been struggling offensively, it's defensively too
Yeah,
that has led to a lot of miscues.
for sure. For sure. And I want to get back to the to that defense as well, but one thing you said there, just like that I agree with is just it looks like they're out of practice. The quality of hockey being played looks sloppy. It doesn't look like, at least it doesn't consistently look like NHL level hockey that we're used to seeing. And so I agree. I think being out of practice could be an issue. I'm not saying this is necessarily an excuse, but I think their early season with one game at home, uh, two games on the road, and then headed back home. I think just the home versus away, and then the distance traveled, and then the number of days in between. I think it hasn't really been super conducive to finding a lot of time and ability to practice the way that they're used to. I think this is something we talked about as well. It just felt like getting enough of the important guys playing together in the preseason that didn't really feel like it happened. Kind of felt like they didn't really mesh. They didn't really get a chance to sort of gel in the preseason, and that I think could play into this as well. But yeah, it does feel like maybe maybe this is just in some ways maybe this is just something that they have to settle into. And I think some concerns like sloppy passing or someone in the chat, I'm having trouble finding it now, just talking about like execution of forechecks and things like that hasn't been super effective from the forwards. So I think certain aspects that are concerning um, can be remedied or at least mitigated, as they get into the rhythm of the season. We've seen a lot of good teams start poorly. I mean, I'm not saying that the Blues are the Edmonton Oilers, but for several years in recent memory, it has felt like the Oilers look bad at the beginning of the season, and then they settle in and they're fine. As you pointed out, the Blues are a second half team, and so maybe we just have to wait for them to figure it out. But I don't know if the Blues want to wait to figure it out. If they want to score 100 points and be a divisional threat, they're gonna have to have a full 82 game effort. And right now they're sort of running out of time to have a consistently good season. Um, and I guess that might be a bit of an overreaction, but they're sort of running out of time to get off to that good start. Is sort of what I mean. Um, we we've talked about before. We've talked about Winnipeg Jets and Washington Capitals last season. They got off to great starts, and it worked out pretty well for them. Um, so I think it's something that the Blues are going to have to quickly find that rhythm and quickly make those adjustments, like you're talking about. Quickly find that time to practice, because I do think they need to get into a rhythm to reach the goals that they've set for themselves. Whether or not regardless of our expectations of them, they have set some decently lofty goals for themselves, and so to reach those, they're really going to need to clean it up, I think. Um,
Yeah.
why don't we pivot now to that defense point? I think this is a big one, and I think one that we can um, really spend some time discussing. But defense is obviously a whole team effort, and we're not really seeing that right now. I'm gonna read through some stats on Natural Stat Trick. First, I'll look at the Blues as a team compared to other teams so far this season. Um, Looking at sort of rate stats per 60 at all strengths, the Blues have allowed they're tied for the fifth most goals allowed per 60 at 4.25. The teams above them are the Islanders, the Ducks, the Sharks, and the Sens. And keep in mind, the sample size is so small that for the Sens and the Blues, who both allowed 8 goals last night, it definitely bumps it up. But they did allow 8 goals last night, so I don't, we can't remove that. Expected goals against, it looks a little bit better. They're the 17th most in the league, so it seems like to some extent they might be getting a little bit unlucky. But then you look at high danger chances allowed, and they've allowed the ninth most high danger chances and the second most high danger goals allowed per 60. They're allowing 3 high danger goals per 60 minutes. It's looking not great in that regard. So those are some of the team stats, right? And like I said, the sample size is small, and so it can be very easily skewed after a couple bad games. Let's dive into some of the individual stats as well. This is on ice at 5v5. Let's do some rate stats again. Or sorry, let's do counting stats this time. So on ice, goals allowed at 5-on-5. Guess who is tied for number 2? It's Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich. They've got 6 goals allowed that they've been on the ice for. Robert Thomas is number 1 expected goals allowed on ice at 4.28. So that's looking pretty rough. Some of these other these top forwards, Robert Thomas, Pavel Buchnevich, they're at the top of the list for high danger chances allowed when they're on the ice. It's not looking good, especially for that top line. And one thing that you said was, Jordan Kyrou might be an exception. You're right. It's in all these stats, he's on the right side of that list. So that line looks a little bit better of Holloway and Kyrou. And so defensively speaking, I think of the veterans and the leaders and the guys we count on, it's really been that top line, Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich, who have struggled the most. And that's disappointing because those are 2 players that we've come to know as pretty, decent two-way forwards. So that is a concern for me. So getting back to the big picture after having looked at some of the stats there, one of the big things that we talked about constantly last season, especially when the Blues really got going in the second half of the year, was defense begets offense. That was sort of a mantra that we said a lot on this podcast. And the idea was the Blues were looking solid defensively, and when you can shut down the opposing team's play and have an effective transition, you're going to score a lot of goals yourself. So that was a big part of their success late last year. But what happens when the defense isn't effective, right? What happens when the team looks like it does right now defensively? It's been rough. So, I mean, do you have any other thoughts on some of these stats I've read out, or sort of the style of transitioning from defense to offense? Part of that is is the goalies being effective at playing the puck. Someone pointed out in the chat a while ago that it seems like, let's see, Ninja said teams have. It seems obvious that teams have been game planning for Bennington and Hofer handling the puck out of the net. Um, I mean, Chicago read Hof's handle his pass pretty well yesterday. So do you think there's anything to that, and sort of what are you seeing? What are you seeing on the Blues' style of defense to offense that was so big for them last year? Like what's going on with that this year? Is there anything that you can identify, Alec, that has been maybe a reason for their struggles in that regard?
Yeah, to continue the comparison between the two Jim Montgomery seasons of last season to this season, the biggest thing, like you said, was, that mantra of defense begets offense. And what we meant by that was like good defensive blocks and chances created rush chances the other way. Well, they
Right.
haven't been making those defensive plays at all. So their offense should be hurting because of that. Now, like I said earlier, I think that they've been able to manufacture rush chances and offensive looks going the other way, meaning that the offensive ceiling for this team, they actually haven't even come close to approaching that yet because they haven't figured out this whole defensive thing yet. And once they do, they could be an even scarier offensive team, which is another reason why I'm not totally flashing all panic signs for the season just yet. But they need to figure out the defense, and the defense was the number one thing that allowed them to stay in games and to play so hot and so coordinated and so effectively together, was because they were able to play such effective defense. And what that looked like was a lot of blocked shots, a lot of disrupting passing lanes, and a lot of creating a solid box in the middle of the ice, in the high danger ice, creating a solid box and not allowing the puck to pass through that zone, essentially creating all of this dead ice around the edge of the rink or the edge of the zone to where, the other team could pass it back and forth, kind of like basketball, swinging it around the arch all day long, but it's not going to lead to anything. And that box has not been present at all for these Blues games that we've seen so far. Maybe somewhat in Vancouver, but even then, I would say they were more offensively dominating in that game. Um, it's that structure, that solid structure of having a sound defensive plan and executing it that made their offense and made the team so effective last season. But it's that hasn't been showing up on tape at all this year. It's like it's completely evaporated, and that's where I'm starting to get a little bit worried. Now I think Jim Montgomery will figure it out and get this team in the right, moving in the right direction, because he is such a proven great head coach. But what we're seeing right now is not very indicative of a Jim Montgomery hockey team. Is not very not what I would expect. Of all the ways that the season could go wrong, this is just like forgetting the ways that in which you were winning last season is not what I would expect. And part of the reason that was so effective last year was because that allowed you to take it to any game script and win any type of game. If it was more physical, you have that box to still back up if another player gets knocked down. If it's more of a skill or a precision team, you have ways of disrupting passing lanes and getting in the ways of shots that block those opportunities. That's what made that team so effective last season. And like I said, they've just been getting away from that entirely. And so I'd really like to see that sort of box structure return, because it worked so effectively. And I don't really have a reason as to why it's gone or what happened, but that's what I'm looking for this team to turn it around. And when they do, if they can find that consistency on defense again, expect their offense, which is already scoring 3-4 goals in losses, or 3 goals in a loss and then 5 in a win, um, already scoring at a very high rate is my point. Expect that offense to be even more deadly when they can unlock this Jim Montgomery system. But right now, the system is definitely off limits, is definitely behind a closed door or something, and they've got to do something to figure out how to get back to it, because otherwise they're going to keep losing games and it's going to continue to look ugly.
For sure. Um, for sure. And I think another part of it um, is the transition game, right? The defense is able to shut it down, and offensively last year they had a lot of different ways to create a winning recipe, but the secret to that success was transitioning from one to the other, and I think that has been another point of struggle for them. It feels like they're kind of stalling out in the neutral zone. I think you look at how much zone time they have compared with some of the other teams in the league. They're looking pretty good. They're spending a lot of time in the offensive zone. They're spending not too much time in the defensive zone. It just feels like defensively, they're giving up. Um, the quality of chances that they're giving up are maybe too high. They might be getting unlucky at times, or in a couple of the games the goalies are struggling. And I'm not super worried about the goalies long term, but they have had a couple of rough games. Offensively, they're spending a lot of time there. It just feels like in some games they're the first game, the issue was the quality of the shots they were taking weren't great. They were just hitting Gustafsson in the chest. The second and third game, it looked a little bit better. I think offensively, they were getting in front of the goalie. They were getting some tips and scoring goals up close and personal. But then last night, it just kind of felt like it stalled out again, and it felt like despite any time they spent in the offensive zone, it felt like they just weren't taking the chances that they needed to. I mean, Colton Parayko led the team in shots, which isn't super rare to see from him, but they just weren't finding enough opportunities deeper into the zone. So that was disappointing to see. But I think another big issue is the transition. So I mean, what's happening? That there was one really cool play. Was it Vancouver or was it Calgary where Philip Broberg had a fantastic like breakout pass that was just so cool. Like that type of play. I think it was on the was it? I think it was Vancouver. Um, just had a fantastic breakout pass, like almost all the way up the ice. And that type of transition is something that we got so used to seeing last year. Sometimes it was the passing, sometimes it was the skating. Cam Fowler had another great. Cam Fowler also had another great play where he skated it into the offensive zone and helped create a goal that way. I can't remember the exact play, but I know it was. I believe it was in the Vancouver game. So that's the type of transition that was a strength for the Blues last year, whether it was passing or skating, getting into the offensive zone. It just feels like the play is stalling out way too much in the neutral zone right now, and it's really biting them, coming back to bite them in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, another point that I want to talk about as a reason for their success last year and something that we may not be seeing as we may not be seeing as a strength for them so far this season is this structure of hockey that Jim Montgomery likes his teams to play. It's something that we've talked about a lot, and it's just sort of that in the Montgomery style of hockey, defensemen are pretty aggressive offensively. Talked about how Colton Parayko and Cam Fowler can really thrive in a system like that, and did last year. They were really effective as a pair offensively and sort of allowed to flex their offensive muscles in a lot of ways and had great seasons as a result. Are we seeing that happen so far this year? Are we seeing the defensemen be as aggressive or as effective offensively? And are we seeing, that's one question, but are we seeing the forwards helping them out, doing what they're supposed to do, back checking and things like that, or forward checking? What are you seeing out of sort of that aspect of the Montgomery structure that we came to know and love last year? Are we seeing enough out of specifically the top guys? I think we could also lump Broberg into that discussion. We could lump Falk into that discussion if we wanted to. I think it's pretty unfair to have huge expectations on Tyler Tucker and Logan Mailloux to be offensive leaders for this team right now, this early on. But for the top four guys, are we seeing enough out of the defensemen in the offensive zone, and are we seeing the forwards support that, in the right way? What are you seeing? This is something that you've talked a lot about on here and have been a big sort of advocate of, is uh, the role of defensemen in the Montgomery style. So, do you have any thoughts on that structure so far this season? And maybe are there any issues there? I mean, it feels like there's a lot of reasons for struggles here.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the defensemen are doing what they're supposed to, at least, and following with the Jim Montgomery style of hockey decently well. Um, so I wouldn't say that it's necessarily been an issue of like defensemen's defense. I think it's more team defense that's been the reason for so
Yeah.
much struggle and hardship in the in your own zone. And I think it's what you made a point there earlier of, are the forwards doing their part? That's the biggest thing that's been lacking for me, is that the forwards are absolutely not doing their part. They are not back checking. They're not getting in the ways of sticks. They're not setting up that box that I talked about just a few minutes ago, and are not providing really anything defensively. They're chasing the puck frantically, which, can on the surface seem beneficial because, well, you got a guy going after the puck that's got to be doing well, right? Well, what that does is it creates openings in your defensive structure if you're not careful about it, and they aren't being careful about it, and it's leading to turnovers, to giveaways, and to goals against. Um, so I think the defensemen are doing a lot better defensively than the forwards. I really do think it's an issue with the forwards mostly.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the defensemen are doing all they can, because the goals you're seeing from high danger are like coming unblocked, are like completely open looks pretty much. Versus it's not like defensemen are getting boxed out and beat in the crease for anything. I think there is blame to go around. That isn't to say that they've been doing everything perfectly. I don't think that's the case either. Um, I think they have taken their lumps, but I think that they've been losing at a normal level, like at a normal rate that you would
Mhm.
expect, and not at a super high rate like the forwards playing defense are. So yeah, I think the defensemen are doing enough, and offensively, they're also doing enough to where they're not the problem. But I think that, I don't know. I also think that there's a lot going wrong on this team, and it would be easy to point to any number of things, including the defense. So I don't blame anyone for thinking that it is the defense's fault. I think it's more on the forwards, but I could really see it being assigned a sort of blanket amount of blame.
I think it is. I think you're right that maybe we need to see the most improvement from the forwards. But I would argue that it is more of a team thing, just because of the team level of defense that um, they have been so good at playing in the past. But yeah, I mean, we really do need the forwards to step up defensively. I think we've seen some. I think we've seen at least more consistency defensively from those defensemen, particularly the top guys. So, um, yeah. Obviously, goaltending has been a bit of an issue. As I said a couple minutes ago, I'm not super worried about it. I think each goalie has had a rough game, and each goalie has had a pretty solid game. Um, what I have found interesting, and this is maybe a conversation for another time, but what I found interesting is that they so far have been an AB, or like 1A, 1B, and just
Yeah,
it's been 50-50 so far,
every
going
other.
back and
Yeah.
forth. So I'm really curious to see how that develops, and maybe Hofer will get a bit of a break after that rough one against Chicago. But so far it's been pretty even, and I think they're really giving Joel Hofer a chance to prove himself, which I can appreciate. Not super worried about the goalies. Um, I would say like let's check back in on them, once the defense looks better, because part of the reason I was excited about this season for the goalies was that we thought defense would be arguably maybe the number one strength of this team. And so the fact that that really hasn't been there has been disappointing. But I find it difficult to really blame all of this on the goalies. Um, so just wanted to throw that in there. Moving forward, Alec, we can speak generally. We can speak. We can talk about some individual players as well. What do we need to see moving forward from the Blues? I'm going to pull up their schedule here. Obviously, they're going to be playing this weekend. They're playing Dallas at home. Is that on Saturday?
Yep.
So you'll be going to that one, right?
Yep.
So we will hopefully break the bad luck charm there. But they'll play Dallas on Saturday, and then next week they've got the Kings, the Mammoth, and the Red Wings. So three, I would argue, solid opponents. I mean, particularly the first two. And so to close out the month after that, we've got the Pens, the Red Wings, and the Canucks again. I mean, it feels like a schedule that should be one where they can come away with a winning record.
Yep.
But it doesn't feel like a particularly easy schedule, I would say. I think you got the Kings in there, you got the Canucks in there again, obviously the Stars and the Mammoth, two solid Central Division opponents. So what do we need to see out of them moving forward? Do you have any thoughts on the team as a whole, or any thoughts on individual players or units of players? We could talk lines or pairs. What are your thoughts on improving these issues?
So the biggest thing for me that has to improve is this team defense. The team defense cannot be this bad for the whole season, or they will not be a playoff team. I think that's just the bottom line, is that if we don't have that Jim Montgomery structure working, then this hockey team is crippling itself and is hampering itself in a very bad way. So that's the number one priority item for me, is the team defense has to improve, has to get at least serviceable. And if you can get back to the level that they were playing at, which is at a very high level, that's great. But even if you can just become a serviceable team defense with the way their offense is already humming, if you get some of these slumping veteran players to start to heat up again, then I think the offense can figure itself out well enough. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this defense has to improve as a team, as a unit, as a whole
Mm-hmm.
squad, really. And then the only other one for me that I think the Blues only go as far as this unit does is Robert Thomas. And I think he's just that important of a player that he has
Yeah,
to
he's
be
an engine.
mentioned. Yeah, he has to be mentioned in his own category because he's so critical to what the Blues want to do. You have to have that star level player in today's NHL, and Robert Thomas is that for us, or can be that. And right now he is not playing at that level. Robert Thomas has to improve and has to be the engine for the offense, really working in tandem with guys like Snuggerud, Buchnevich, Kyrou, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and working better as a team, or the team will work better following behind him if he can lead the way, which he has not done so far. So those are the two things that I really think have to turn around if this team wants any hope of coming out with a winning record in the month of October.
Yeah, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think those are the biggest things for me as well. So I won't harp too much on those, but defense was expected to be the number one strength of this team. It has not been. It's been a weakness, and so that does have to change. And then not just from a single game perspective, but like a single play perspective, but from game to game trend perspective. As you said, once they start playing better defense, maybe defense can beget offense in that way too. And then just to sort of bring it back to the topic of our episode today, which is these slumping or struggling or I guess just underperforming veteran top players. This is sort of the focus of today. Robert Thomas is the big one. He is, as you said, the engine of this team. He has to be better. He just has to be. I would say the Holloway, Shin, Kyrou line has looked decent. I don't really have a huge
Yeah.
issues with that one. I would say maybe I would want to see Kyrou take some more shots, take some more opportunities, some more scoring chances, things like that. But other than that, I don't have a lot of qualms with that line. But beyond that, we're not really talking about veteran forwards or forward leaders. Colton Parayko and Cam Fowler, they've had a couple rougher performances, but I think on the whole they're looking okay. Um, yeah, it feels like, offensively speaking, I just want these top guys, Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, to take more chances. But the other thing that I'll point to, which is sort of my other big point, is just, I mean, it's more qualitative, but it's just in vibes based. But it's like, where is the energy and the heart for this team? That feels something like something that's been lacking from those top players who we saw leading the way in that regard last year, right? That second line especially was just dynamic and intense, and they really set the tone for this team. The one who's been setting the tone for this team in its best moment so far is Jake Neighbors, and it's great that he can do that. It's great that he can sort of have that, that great start to this season. It's great that he can be a leader for this team. I think he's headed in that direction. He's probably going to get an A on his sweater one day, uh, provided he stays in St. Louis long enough. I think that's great for him to be able to do, but he just can't be the only one. You can't have your young player being the only one leading the way like that. So Robert Thomas has to do that. Has to do that. We need Braden Shen to do that. We need. I mean, Robert Thomas isn't a particularly like fiery guy, but it just feels like he and Buchnevich especially just look flat out there. And so I want to see more energy, more passion out of these guys. That's another, like I said, more qualitative thing for me. But I think that was such a big strength for them last year, and I mean, we joked about it as like the power of friendship going a long way for them. But I would say we haven't really seen that same heart out of this team so far. So I want to see some of that injected into this team as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully we see some of those improvements moving forward. We'll be back here to talk about it. But Alec, you're going to be at this Dallas game, man. I hope you have fun. Dallas is a good team, obviously, so I hope it's a good one. If anyone's going to the game, see if you can find Alec at Enterprise and I don't know, tell him what you really think of the pod. But yeah, we'll be back maybe later on this weekend or at some point next week to sort of break down the Dallas game and the games that follow, talk about any trends that emerge, all that stuff. But we go live twice a week for those that are newer to the pod and talking all things Blues all the time. So we'd appreciate if you would follow along and stay tuned in. The best way to do that is to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, follow, rate, review wherever you listen. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you can find us on socials as well. We love to engage with everyone over there: Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. We've got new graphics for the new season. Go check those out on all those platforms. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.